Pregnancy week by week. Pregnancy, also known as gestation, is the time during which one or more offsprings develops inside a woman. Pregnancy occurs when a sperm fertilizes an egg after it is released from the ovary during ovulation. The fertilized egg then travels down into the uterus where implantation occurs. A successful implantation results in a pregnancy. On average, a full-term pregnancy lasts 40 weeks. On this presentation, we are going to talk week by week on how the fetus develops into a full human baby. First trimester. Week 1. Ovulation. Midway through a menstrual cycle, the dominant follicle in the ovary swells and then ruptures, releasing the mature egg of the month. That egg bursts through the walls of the ovary and is immediately swallowed up by the fresh opening of the fallopian tubes, where it will take a 6-day odyssey down to the uterus. Week 2. Fertilization. During the next 24 hours, the egg will be fertilized if one of the nearly 215 million sperms in an ejaculation manages to swim from the vagina through the cervix up to the uterus into the fallopian tube and penetrate the egg. Over the next several days, the fertilized egg will start dividing into multiple cells as it travels down the fallopian tube, enters your uterus, and starts to grow into the uterine lining. During the next 10 to 30 hours, the sperm's nucleus merges with the eggs and they combine their genetic materials. The fertilized egg is called a zygote. Week 3. Implantation. The egg takes 3 or 4 days to travel from the fallopian tube to the uterus, dividing into 100 or more identical cells along the way. Now nestled in the nutrient-rich lining of the uterus is a microscopic ball of hundreds of rapidly multiplying cells that will develop into a fetus. This ball, called a blastocyst, has begun to produce the pregnancy hormone HCG, which tells the ovaries to stop releasing eggs. A day or two later, it will begin burrowing into the lush lining of the uterus, where it continues to grow and divide. Week 4. The ball of cells is now officially an embryo. It's around this time, when your next period will normally be due, that you may be able to get a positive result on a home pregnancy test. The baby is the size of a poppy seed. The embryo consists of 2 layers called hypoblast and epiblast, from which all of your baby's organs will begin to develop over the next 6 weeks. Week 5. The embryo is now made up of 3 layers: the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm, which will later form all of the organs and tissue of the baby. At this point, the baby resembles a tadpole more than a human, but it is growing fast. The circulatory system is beginning to form, and the tiny heart will start to beat this week. Week 6. By week 6, the baby's nose, mouth, and ears are starting to take shape, and the intestines and brain are beginning to develop. There are dark spots where the baby's eyes and nostrils are starting to form. The baby is the size of a lentil. Week 7. The baby has doubled in size since last week. Little hands and feet that look more like paddles are emerging from the developing arms and legs. The main part of the eyes that allow the baby to see start developing this week. The baby is the size of a blueberry. Week 8. Your baby has started moving around, though you won't feel movement yet. Nerve cells are branching out, forming primitive neutral pathways. The baby's respiratory system is forming. Breathing tubes stem from its throat to the branches of its developing lungs, and the fetus has fingers and toes now. The baby is the size of a kidney bean. Week 9. The baby's basic physiology is in place, but there is so much more to come. Its embryonic tail has disappeared. It weighs just a fraction of an ounce, but is about to start gaining weight fast. The 4 chambers of your baby's heart have formed. The placenta is developed enough now to take over most of the critical jobs of producing hormones. The baby is the size of a grape. Week 10. The embryo has completed the most critical portion of the development. His skin is still translucent, but his tiny limbs can bend and fine details like nails are starting to form. The baby's forehead temporarily bulges with his developing brain and sits very high on his head, which measures half the length of his body. The baby is the size of a kumquat. Week 11. The baby is almost fully formed. The baby is kicking, stretching, and even hiccuping as the baby's diaphragm is developing, but you cannot feel any activity yet. The baby is the size of a fig. On this week, the baby is no longer called an embryo, as it is the beginning of the fetal period. All the vital organs of the baby should be in place, and many have already started to function. By the end of the week, the baby's genitalia will start developing. Week 12. This week, the baby reflexes kick in. His or her fingers will soon begin to open and close. The toes will curl, and his mouth will make sucking movement. The baby can feel your movement, but you won't be able to feel his movement yet. The baby is the size of a lime. Week 13. This is the last week of your first trimester. The baby's tiny fingers now have fingerprints, and the veins and organs are clearly visible through the skin. By now, the baby is the size of a pea pot. Second trimester. Week 14. The baby's brain impulses have begun to fire, and the baby is using its facial expressions and muscles. The kidneys are working by now. The baby is the size of a lemon. Week 15. The baby's eyelids are still together, but now they can sense the light. By this week, an ultrasound will be able to reveal the baby's sex. The baby is the size of an apple by now. Week 16. The baby's hair starts to grow. It isn't visible yet, but the pattern that the baby's scalp will have starts to form. Now, the legs are more developed, and by this point, you can feel the baby kick your stomach. The head is more upright, and the ears are close to their final position. The baby is the size of an avocado. Week 17. The baby can finally move its joints, and the skeleton is now hardening to bone. The umbilical cord is growing stronger and thicker by now. The baby is the size of a turnip. Week 18. The baby is flexing its arms and legs, and you may be able to feel those movements now. Internally, a protective cup of myelin is forming around its nerves. The baby is the size of a bell pepper. Week 19. The baby's senses, such as smell, vision, touch, taste, and hearing, are developing, and the baby might be able to hear your voice now. The baby is the size of a heirloom tomato. Week 20. The baby can swallow now, and the digestive system of the baby is producing meconium. The baby is the size of a banana. Week 21. The baby becomes restless. The baby's movements have gone from fluttering to full-on kicks and jabs against the walls of your womb. The baby is the size of a carrot. Week 22. The baby now looks more like a newborn, but it has a long way to go. Features such as lips and eyebrows are more distinct, but the pigment and the color of his eyes isn't present yet. The baby is the size of an spaghetti squash. Week 23. The baby's ears are finally getting better at picking up sounds. After birth, the baby might recognize certain noises that it heard while being in the womb. The baby is the size of a large mango. Week 24. The baby cuts a pretty long and lean figure, but at this point it will become chubbier as time comes. The skin is still thin and translucent, but that will begin to change very soon. Your baby is the size of an ear of corn. Week 25. The baby's wrinkled skin is starting to fill out with baby fat, making the baby look more like a newborn. The hair is beginning to come in, and now it has a color and a texture. The baby is now the same weight as an average rutabaga. Week 26. The baby is now inhaling and exhaling amniotic fluid, which helps the development of its lungs. These breathing movements are good practice for the first breath of air at birth. The baby is the size of a bunch of scallions. Week 27. This is the last week of your second trimester. The baby now sleeps and wakes on a regular schedule, and the brain is very active. The lungs aren't fully formed, but they can function outside the womb with medical help. The baby is the size of a head of a cauliflower. The third trimester. Week 28. The baby's eyesight is developing, which may enable the baby to sense light filtering in from the outside. The baby can finally blink, and the eyelashes are growing. The baby is the size of a large eggplant. Week 29. The baby's muscles and lungs are getting ready to function in the outside world, and the head of the baby is growing to make room for its developing brain. The baby is the size of a butternut squash. Week 30. The baby is surrounded by a print and half of amniotic fluid, although there will be less of it as she grows and claims more space inside your uterus. The baby is now the size of a large cabbage. Week 31. The baby can now turn his head from side to side. A protective layer of fat is accumulating under his skin, filling out his arms and legs. The baby is the size of a coconut. Week 32. By this point, you will start to gain weight easily. Half of that goes straight to your baby, who will gain 1/3 to half her birth weight in the next 7 weeks in preparation for life outside the womb. The baby is the size of a large jicama. Week 33. By this point, the baby's bones are not fully fused. This allows them to shift in his head, and they will help him squeeze through the birth canal. They won't fully fuse until adulthood. The baby is the size of a pineapple. Week 34. The baby's central nervous system is maturing, and so are its lungs. The baby is the size of a cantaloupe. Week 35. It's getting very tight inside the womb. Your baby's kidneys are fully developed, and his liver can process some waste production. The baby is the size of a honeydew melon. Week 36. The baby is gaining an ounce a day. The baby is also losing most of the fine down that covered her body, along with the cervix callosa, a waxy substance that was protecting the skin until now. The baby is the size of a head of Romani lettuce. Week 37. Though it might look like he is fully formed, the baby is not ready for the outside world yet. Over the next 2 weeks, his lungs and brain will fully mature. But for now, the due date is getting very close. The baby is the size of a bunch of Swiss charts. Week 38. The baby's eyes are getting some color, but the irises are not fully pigmented. So if the baby is born with blue eyes, they could change to a darker color up until she's about a year old. The baby is the size of a leek. Turning full term. Week 39. The baby's physical development is complete, but he's still busy putting on fat that the baby will need to help regulate its body temperature in the outside world. The baby is the size of a mini watermelon. Week 40. This is the last week of pregnancy. You should expect your due date to be on one of these days during this week or the next. You might expect the symptoms of going into labor. The last step of this process is labor and delivery. This is the process by which the baby is delivered into the outside world.